I'm now joined by Dominic Sewela, who was recently appointed as the Chief Executive of Barloworlds Group. We'll talk about his strategy for the group and what he brings to Barloworlds. A very good afternoon to you, Dominic, and congratulations. Well, we had a bit of a chat last week about market looking at your results, but we really want to know who is Dominic Sewela, the head of Barloworlds Group.
Well, Dominic was born and bred in Soshanguve, in a township just outside of Pretoria. That's where I did my high schooling, and studied chemical engineering out in the United States. Came back, spent most of my time with petrochemical companies and petroleum companies like Shell and Sasol. And just about in the mid-90s, I joined Barloworlds, and I then left Barloworlds, went into entrepreneurial route, and came back around 2007.
So you're basically celebrating your 10-year anniversary pretty soon, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
So now you're sitting in the hot seat, and it's all about strategy going forward and what kind of legacy you want to leave at Barloworlds.
Yeah, I think in terms of strategy, what is important is about growth. Because I think if you want to, in fact, if you inherit a company, with the legacy that Barloworlds has, it's important that, you continue that legacy. We've been around for 115 years, and one of the key legacies for me is to ensure that I'm able to pass that baton to somebody else who will take the company to another 115 years. And therefore, in so doing, we need to then focus on saying, we've got cyclical businesses currently, the automotive as well as the equipment business, how best in growing the business you look at counter-cyclicality. And that's one of the things that, we will be looking at, but because most of our principles are, the likes of Caterpillar. It's not easy necessarily to get, new territory because it's highly, competitive to get territory. So we need to start looking at other areas where we could actually grow over and above just automotive and Caterpillar.
Which, in terms of the African continent, we're celebrating Africa Day today. Yes. Happy Africa Day, by the way.
Thank you.
And where are some of the growth areas on the African continent? What kind of growth are you seeing perhaps in the next 4 to 5 years on the African continent? We know that growth is a bit sticky here in South Africa as well as the rest of the continent.
I think, the African continent, if you look at infrastructure growth, because we really strong on the earth-moving equipment side, there's a lot of growth if you look at countries like Angola. You look at countries like the DRC, because those are the territories where we're currently present, and we've been operating in some of those countries for more than 20 years. In our view, there's a lot of cyclicalities, because when things are in a downturn, when commodity prices are low, people get very negative, but they don't understand that actually they will come up. I remember in my early days when I was still an engineer, the price of crude oil was languishing in the teens. And today, even though it's still lower than where it was, but it will come up. So, and people will continue to live, and there's going to be population growth. Therefore, it is very important to focus on saying you've got to be long-term, you can't be short-term, and continue to build capabilities in those areas. So for me, Angola, the DRC, even Mozambique for that matter, it will come up because natural gas, they've got a lot of natural gas in that country. So over time, they will begin to get their politics right. Unfortunately, there's a lot of political issues, challenging some of the territories we operate in.
Indeed, looking at that political issues, and there's a bit of a barrier when we talk about intra-Africa trade. Yeah. What needs to happen in order for us to foster that intra-Africa trade? There's so much happening on the African continent. Yeah. We can leverage off each other and trade well. But where do you think the barriers are? Is it all about political will, or is it something more here?
I think there is a bit of a political will, and probably the lack of understanding of how the dynamics of the flow of economy works. Because there's a lot of trade flows between these countries, and I think if some of the governments can just open up their borders and allow free trade, because if you for companies like ourselves, if I have to move products from South Africa to Angola or even Mozambique, I have to go through several borders, and at every border gate, the time you lose, so from an efficiency point of view, is not very, very good. There's areas where we can cooperate in terms of infrastructure, where countries could actually collaborate. If you look at rail infrastructure, for instance, it's something that, leaves much to be desired. Similarly with, highways. So my view is that, there is room when politicians can get their act together and understand that there is, there's one thing about being independent, but there's a lot to do with codependence as well.
And the political situation here is a bit unsteady here in South Africa. Yeah. There's a lot going on. As a leader at the helm of Barloworlds, you're probably hearing a lot of uncertainty running through the business. As the head of Barloworld, what are you telling your employees about the future?
Yeah. I think, what I tell my employees about the future is important to be optimistic, because we could actually be pessimistic. But if you look where South Africa has come and where we are, we're in a very interesting time. Yes, we've got challenges, but I think the good thing about South Africa is a democratic country. When you look at our Chapter 9 institutions, they work. When you look at the elections, we had, free and fair elections last year. And I think, if we look at 2019, I think we're going to have a free and fair elections. I think what is important, though, is that people should actually be able, to stand up when they don't like certain things and be heard. And because I think when people say we are actually in control of our own destiny, so we'll choose leaders who are to be held accountable, then we're going to see progress in South Africa. But however, if leadership is not accountable to those who voted for them, obviously it creates problem for us, and we can end up being in a tight space. But my view, South Africa has got huge prospects. We're sitting with a lot of mineral resources, and even our people, they're very resilient. And I think, in my view, I'm saying to our people, it's important that they remain positive and engaged.
We have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. That was
you.
Dominic Sewela, CEO of Barloworld.